In the very heart of North Carolina, in the dense, ancient forests of Chatham County, there exists a place that even the bravest locals only speak of in whispers. It is not marked on any tourist maps, and no well-trodden paths lead to it. It is an anomaly, a scar on the face of nature. A perfectly circular ring, about 40 feet in diameter, where for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years, nothing has grown. No grass, no flowers, not even the hardiest weed. Just bare, trodden earth that stands in stark contrast to the lush greenery of the surrounding forest. The place is called the Devil's Tramping Ground. The legend, passed down from generation to generation, says that this is where the Prince of Darkness himself appears every night. He walks in circles again and again, tirelessly pacing the boundaries of his temporary prison on Earth. And in these endless contemplations, he devises new plans of suffering for humanity. His footsteps are so filled with malice and infernal fire that the very earth is scorched beneath them, unable to bring forth life. It is said that no animal dares to step inside the circle. Dogs, even the most courageous, tuck their tails and whimper in terror at its proximity. Any object left in the center overnight vanishes without a trace by morning. And the most terrible warning, known to every local, is simple. To spend the night there is a fatal mistake, a mistake that can never be corrected. Mike, a journalism student from a small nearby college, considered himself a pragmatic, rational thinker. To him, the legend of the Devil's Tramping Ground was nothing more than a clever marketing ploy to attract tourists and thrill seekers. He had heard all the stories about missing people, strange lights, and whispers coming from the woods. He had heard how dogs refuse to enter the circle, how compasses go haywire, and how electronics fail. But to him, these were just tall tales seasoned with local color. One October evening, when the air was already cool and the leaves on the trees burned with shades of gold and blood, Mike was sitting with his best friends, Sarah, Ben, and Chloe. They were roasting marshmallows over a campfire by a lake. "Can you believe it? I heard that nonsense about the Devil's Tramping Ground again today. Some old guy in a general store was telling tourists he'd seen ghosts there himself. It's laughable." Sarah, a girl with serious eyes who was fascinated by folklore, shook her head. "You shouldn't say that, Mike. Some things are older than our logic. People don't fear that place for no reason." Ben, the eternal adventurer, just grinned. "I'd love to see it. Can you imagine the adrenaline rush?" "Exactly," Mike chimed in, feeling a rush of excitement. His journalistic nature demanded facts, evidence. "I'm ready to prove it's all a fabrication, and I'm going to do it in style." He stood up, his face looking defiant and self-assured in the firelight. "I'm going to pitch a tent right in the center of that damned circle and spend the whole night there, from dusk till dawn, and I'll document everything. You'll see, there's no devil there, just silence, mosquitoes, and my victory over foolish superstitions." His friends laughed at first, but seeing the determination in Mike's eyes, they fell silent. "Are you serious?" Chloe, who was always afraid of the dark, asked quietly. "Mike, that's a bad idea." "It's the best idea," he exclaimed. "I'll take cameras, a professional voice recorder. I'll record every sound, every rustle. It'll be sensational material for my term paper. Debunking the myth, a night at the Devil's Tramping Ground. Can you imagine the headlines?" Deep down, each of them wanted to test the legend, to find out what was true and what was fiction. After much persuasion and Mike's assurances that he would stay in touch, they agreed. The plan was simple. They would set up camp at a safe distance at the edge of the woods, while Mike, their brave knight of science, would venture into the heart of darkness. They arrived late in the evening, just as the sun touched the treetops. The forest greeted them with deep shadows and the quiet, unsettling rustle of leaves. The moon, like a cold silver disk, barely pierced through the thick branches. Finding the circle was surprisingly easy. Even in the twilight, it stood out against the forest clearing, a dark, bare patch of earth that looked like an unhealed wound. The air here felt different, heavier, still. Even Mike's friends, standing at the edge, felt it. Ben, who had brought his dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, was surprised to see the dog plant his paws firmly on the ground, refusing to go any further, whining piteously. "See, even Buddy senses something," Sarah said nervously. "That's because he smells other animals," Mike dismissed, though he himself felt a strange chill run down his spine. He pulled his gear from the car, a new tent, a powerful flashlight, a sleeping bag, a camera tripod, and of course, the voice recorder. With a determined stride, he crossed the invisible boundary and stepped on the trodden ground. It was hard under his feet, like stone. He pitched the tent exactly in the center, driving the stakes in with a dull, unpleasant sound. "Well, see you at the dawn," he called out cheerfully to his friends. "Don't eat all the marshmallows without me." He turned on a lantern inside the tent and checked the recorder. "I'll record every sound," he said more to himself than to them. "Tomorrow we'll listen and laugh." His friends built a small campfire at the edge of the woods, outside the cursed place. From there they had a clear view of Mike's lone tent, glowing from within, like a ghostly beacon in a sea of darkness. They decided to stay awake and keep watch all night. At first, everything was calm. Mike lay in his sleeping bag, reading a book, and occasionally making notes on his recorder. 10:15 p.m. All is quiet. I can hear the crackling of my friend's campfire and a night bird calling somewhere in the distance. No devils spotted. He chuckled at his own bravery. This was even easier than he had thought. But about half an hour later, he noticed a strange change. The forest fell silent. Suddenly and completely, the chirping of crickets vanished, the croaking of frogs ceased, the wind in the branches died down. The silence became so deep, so oppressive, that Mike involuntarily held his breath. It felt as if he could hear the blood pulsing in his ears. Even the crackle of his friend's campfire became faint, as if absorbed by an invisible wall. He turned on the recorder again. His voice now was barely audible, a frightened whisper. 10:48 p.m. Very strange. The forest has gone completely silent. Absolute silence. I feel a sort of pressure, like before a storm. Well, it seems the devil really does like his peace and quiet. But his voice no longer held its former confidence. A nervous note had crept in, one that he himself noticed. Around midnight, he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, steady, unhurried. Someone was walking in a circle, right along its perimeter, on the line between the grass and the bare earth. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was distinct, as if someone in heavy boots was treading on dry leaves. The footsteps would approach the tent, then recede, moving with relentless monotony. Mike's heart began to pound furiously. He sat up abruptly and turned off his lantern. Unzipping the tent, he cautiously peeked outside. The moonlight flooded the clearing, and he could see everything around him clearly. It was empty. There was no one there, just trees, shadows, and the distant flicker of the campfire where the figures of his friends stood frozen. He climbed back into the tent, trying to convince himself they were just auditory hallucinations. But the footsteps didn't stop. Thump, thump, thump. They sounded again and again. At that very moment, a mournful howl came from the friends' camp, which turned into frantic barking. Then they saw Buddy, having broken free from his leash, bolt deep into the woods, away from the cursed circle. Mike turned on the recorder again, his voice now a barely audible, frightened whisper. 12:12 a.m. I hear footsteps. They're walking in a circle around the tent. I looked outside, there's no one there. My friends hear something too. Their dog ran off. God, what is that? The footsteps ceased as suddenly as they had begun. Silence returned, but now it was even more sinister. Mike sat motionless, listening to every sound. Closer to 2 in the morning, the tent began to shake. At first, just slightly, as if from a gust of wind. But there was no wind. The leaves on the trees hung still. Then the shaking intensified. The fabric vibrated as if someone or something was shaking it from the outside. And then he heard a new sound, a scratching. Someone was dragging something sharp along the outside of the tent, leaving long, slow scratches. Skrrr. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, and it made his hair stand on end. In panic, Mike grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking so much he could barely tap the screen. He dialed Ben's number. After a long series of rings, all he heard on the line was static and crackling. But through it, he could make out voices, distorted, inhuman. They whispered the same words over and over. Get out. Get out. Get out of there. Horrified, he threw the phone away. That couldn't be his friends. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. A moment of absolute calm. Mike held his breath. Maybe it was over. But in the next second, the walls of the tent ripped apart with a deafening tear. Not from the outside, but from the inside, as if an invisible bomb had detonated within. The fabric shredded into pieces. Mike was thrown by a shockwave onto the hard, cold ground. He lay there, stunned, trying to understand what had happened. And when he lifted his head, his blood ran cold. Beyond the 40-foot circle, there was nothing. No forest, no campfire, no friends, just an endless, velvety black void in which there were no stars, no moon, not even the concept of space. He was on a small island of reality, floating in a sea of absolute nothingness. And in this void, he was not alone. In the middle of the circle, moving along its unchangeable path, walked a tall, translucent figure. Its outlines were blurred, like looking through heated air. But where a face should have been, 2 yellow, unblinking eyes burned. They glowed with their own sinister light. The figure moved slowly, treading heavily, and with each step, the ground beneath Mike vibrated slightly. It did not look at him. It did not notice him. It was simply walking its eternal circle. Mike opened his mouth to scream, a silent scream of horror, despair, and madness erupted from his lungs. But the sound was not born. The void swallowed it before it could leave his throat. He screamed, but in the world where he found himself, sound did not exist. At dawn, as the first rays of sun cut through the morning mist, the friends, exhausted by fear and a sleepless night, dared to approach the circle. The scene they found made them freeze. Mike's tent was torn to shreds, scattered across the clearing. His belongings, a sleeping bag, a book, a flashlight, were strewn about. But Mike himself was nowhere to be found. They searched the entire area, calling his name, but only the forest's silence answered. No tracks, no signs of a struggle. He had simply vanished. And then Sarah saw it. At the very edge of the circle, on the border between the bare earth and the grass, lay the voice recorder. She carefully picked it up. Her hands were trembling. Ben and Chloe moved closer. Sarah pressed play. At first, they heard Mike's calm, confident voice making his initial notes. Then, a long pause, and his voice again, but now with a hint of anxiety as he spoke of the silence. And then they heard it. The distinct, heavy footsteps, sounding just as clearly on the recording as they had heard them during the night. Mike's frightened whisper came from the recording. He hears him walking, but there's no one here. Then came the sound of the tent shaking and the scratching, which sent shivers down their spines. Then the fragmented recording of the phone call, through which the inhuman whisper was barely audible. And Mike's last words, spoken almost inaudibly, filled with final, all-consuming terror. He's here now. He's inside. And after that, his voice cut off, but the recording continued for a few more seconds. And in those seconds of silence, they heard something else, a long, heavy, rasping breath, as if something huge, something not of this world, had exhaled directly into the microphone. And then a sharp click, and the recording ended. Mike's body was never found. The police conducted an investigation, but found no evidence of a crime. He had simply vanished. From that day on, his friends never returned to that forest, and the locals added a new, modern chapter to the old legend. They still say that if you dare to stand near the Devil's Tramping Ground at night, you can hear strange, heavy footsteps walking in a circle. And sometimes, if you listen very, very closely, you can hear a scream that is cut short in an absolute, unearthly silence.